Hello, my name is Joe Crawford. Along with Kim Conant, the Director of Curriculum and Grants, we gave a presentation last week on November 10th to families to talk a bit about the middle school report cards. However, after we listened back to that presentation, we heard that some of the audio was poor, and we wanted to re-record this information to make sure everybody could hear everything that was in that presentation. So we'd like to begin by talking a bit about the different letters on the report card. As you probably remember, beginning a couple of years ago, we transitioned away from traditional letter grades, the A, B, C, D, F, and we began using a rubric-based system that uses the codes LP, EP, and DP. We did this as a first step towards moving toward a competency-based or a standards-based reporting model. There's kind of several different reasons why we want to go in this direction. The primary purpose is we want to provide more detailed, focused information for parents and students that directly relates to student achievement. And the traditional system, although it's been used for a long time, was really designed to kind of sort and rank students. And it's not a very precise system if our goal is to provide information about individual student academic performance. So there are a few differences between traditional grading and competency-based grading. Most of us are pretty familiar with traditional grading, so we typically feel pretty comfortable with it. Some of the primary qualities of a traditional grading system is it usually uses a 100-point scale. One of the challenges to a 100-point scale is it's not what we call an equal interval scale when we match it up with the A, B, C, D, F, which basically just means that, the difference between a F and a D is not the same as the difference between a D and a C. And so when we average lots of scores, what ends up happening is we have distortions of the grade. The grade can be distorted by oftentimes really low scores. So that's one reason why it's not typically used as a great measure of reporting student achievement. The second thing is that in a traditional grading system, we average all grades together and we kind of come up with one score, one letter that explains the entire course. So most of us are familiar with seeing our own, middle school or high school report cards that said, math B. That B doesn't necessarily tell us a whole lot about what we know or don't know. It doesn't provide good information for those purposes. And then finally, in a traditional system, teachers assign grades to assignments, whether they be homework assignments or projects or tests. So they're grading things, and not all of those things, not all of those assignments are directly aligned to student learning targets, the things that we are in fact supposed to be measuring. A good example of this is, like, for instance, when I was a middle school student, I might get 10 points on an assignment if I covered my textbook. Now, sure, I need to cover my textbook if my teacher asked me to do that. I know it's a little bit of an antiquated example, but that grade really has nothing to do with my knowledge of the subject, so it distorts the overall effect of the grading process. So to contrast traditional grading, we look a little bit at competency-based grading. Competency-based grading, a few things about it. One, it uses an equal interval scale. So in our case, it's a 1 through 4 scale, which is pretty common. It's what most schools, colleges who use these types of scales, they typically use a 1 to 4. And as you probably understand, the difference between a 1 and a 2 and a 2 and a 3 and a 3 and a 4, it's all an equal interval scale. So when we do have to average things together, it reduces or eliminates that distortion effect. Second thing is that in a competency-based system, each learning target is graded separately. So what we mean by that is, as a curriculum team, and we worked over last year and the summer with teachers to clearly define the curriculum. And that means we took a very close look at the standards that are in the Common Core State Standards or in the Next Gen Science Standards. We looked at all these kind of standards documents, and we broke out what it was that all students need to learn and be able to do at each grade level in each subject. And in doing that, we kind of drafted statements. I call them learning targets here, but our language in Dairy is we have competency statements, which are kind of the bigger, broad statements. And then we have what we call I can statements. And those are the smaller learning targets that make up the competency. So a competency is made up of smaller pieces called I can statements. In a competency-based grading system, we are grading those things specifically. So in the report card that we'll show you an example of, students are going to get scores on learning targets. So you're going to be able to actually pull apart the math or the reading or the science to separate learning targets. So it just gives you more information, more specific information about student learning. The final piece is that one really big shift in competency-based learning is teachers are no longer assessing assignments. They're not grading those assignments. They are grading the learning targets that are attached to those assignments. So in order for a grade to be entered into that book, it has to be directly tied to one or more of the learning targets. So you can't grade non-academic factors in a competency-based system. Now, I do want to take a step back because there was a question in the audience, and again, I know that people couldn't hear those questions, which is why we're re-recording this presentation. One of the questions was, well, how do we provide feedback, incentive for students to do the non-academic things, like maybe covering their textbook? Again, that's probably a bad example because we don't have a lot of textbooks. But if we have certain non-academic requirements of our class, just being a good citizen, attending, meetings with teammates, turning things on time, all of those kind of non-academic factors, they are graded in a competency-based system. They're just attached to specific different learning targets. So in Dairy, we have what we call dispositions, and those dispositions, which are perseverance, problem solving, and self-motivation, directly speak to some of those non-academic behaviors that are still important. So we're still grading them and reporting on them, and you'll still see them on the report card, but they will be pulled out. So they will be separated from the academic factors. Another way to think of it is that it is possible that a student is really good at math, but does not follow directions, or is really good at science, but gives up really easily when tasks are difficult. In our new reporting system, we'll tell you about both of those things instead of pushing them together, which may cause them to be distorted, and as parents, you may never even really get that kind of feedback. Okay, let's take a look at a traditional report card. This is a report card I've got highlighted here. It says it's from Gilbert H. Hood Middle School from 2018-19. This could be a West Runningbrook Middle School. The reports are identical. And even though it says 2018-19, I can tell you that when I was an assistant principal at Gilbert H. Hood from 2005 through 2013, this is also exactly what our report card looked like. So, and this is not all that uncommon. For most of us here, we've seen report cards that look pretty similar to this, right? So it's got the 6 courses that the student is in. It would typically have the teacher's names. I've whited them out here. And it has a letter grade, and then it has a comment. So we wanted to point out that this is kind of what the traditional report card looks like. And our concern is it really doesn't provide parents or students a lot of information about student learning and achievement. Okay. Last year, and actually this started in the pandemic, we moved away from those A, B, C, D, F codes, and we started using DP, EP, and LP. And this is an example of what our report card looked like last year. As you can see here, it's not very different from the traditional report card. We have started using some different codes, and the reason that we use these codes, this DP, LP, and EP, is there's a rubric attached. And in the old report card, it would have been on the bottom here that said what LP stands for, which is limited progress, or EP stands for emerging progress, or DP stands for demonstrating proficiency. One of the reasons we use codes like that is because with a rubric, we actually define, we explain in more detail what the difference between an LP, EP, and a DP is. That is a little bit different than the traditional A, B, C, D, F scores because as anyone who went to traditional school knows, an A in one teacher's classroom was not necessarily an A in another teacher's classroom. There was a lot of subjectivity. And as I said when we gave this presentation live the other night, subjectivity is a reality. There are human beings that are making these decisions. Regardless of the grading system that you use, you will always have a level of subjectivity, or I guess another way that I would like to say it is professional judgment. Teachers are professionals. They are experts, not all that different than doctors and lawyers, and they're trained to make professional judgments. What a competency-based system does with a rubric is it provides teachers the ability to use common language to define these grades. So we did make a step in that direction. This is what the report card looked like last year. However, coming into this year, after we did all the work over the summer with teachers to really define the curriculum, we said this just isn't good enough. It doesn't provide enough information for parents. So here's a picture of what our proposed report card might look like. We're still in the final stages of design, but we wanted to give you kind of a picture of the type of information you may see. Now, this is an actual real report card that I pulled with real data from an existing student. Normally the student's photo would be up in the corner there. And this is incomplete data because when I pulled this, it's middle of the term. Teachers have not put in all of their assessment data, but there is some that is in here. As you can see, there at the top of the report card is our academic scoring scale. So this is where we really try to be clear about what each of the codes mean. And even though you see 5 different codes up here, I want to point out that really the 4 on the right, LP, EP, DP, and HP, are the 4 possible scores that a student can receive based on teacher assessment. The code IE, or insufficient evidence, is a placeholder when we don't have enough information. So that might happen when a student does not complete all of the assessments or a good chunk of the assessments, so the teacher cannot make a professional judgment about whether or not the student knows or doesn't know the material. Here's an example. I had a conversation with a teacher not too long ago in which the teacher said, I have 2 students. One student didn't take the assessment. The other student took the assessment and got all of the questions wrong. How do I know what to score for each of these 2 students? And that teacher said, I don't have any information about whether or not these students know anything. And my response was, you actually have a lot of information about one of the students. In fact, the student who took the assessment and got everything wrong, you have some good evidence that student doesn't know the material, and that's a really strong case for giving that student an LP. However, the student that didn't take the assessment for whatever the reason is, whether they were absent, whether they refused to take it, whether they were sick and they missed a bunch of instructions, so then the teacher chose not to give them the assessment because they weren't there for the instruction. Whatever the reason is, if they didn't take the assessment, we don't have enough information to make a professional judgment, and that's where the code insufficient evidence might come into play. Now, below the academic rubric, you can see that there are 5 courses listed here. And then below each course, there are, it looks like anywhere from 1 to 3 competency statements with scores attached. Now, in most cases, a course will have at minimum 3, maybe 4 competency statements, at maximum maybe 7 or 8 competency statements. This is middle of the term, so this only shows the competencies that have been assessed so far. So the ones that have not yet been assessed they don't show up. So what this does is it gives you a little bit more specific information about students' academic achievement. If you kind of think back and compare to what we've been using in the past, this gives you far more information about how your child is doing in language arts or math or physical education or science or social studies. You can expect to see even more data as the term goes on and they continue to assess. Okay, so although we briefly talked about the achievement level or the rubric scale in the previous slide, wanted to really focus in on it and make sure that everybody understands our thinking. If you kind of lop the insufficient evidence off the bottom there, you'll see that our scale is really a 4-point scale that moves up from LP all the way to HP. The key piece that I wanted you to focus on in this slide is the difference between the proficiency side and the approaching proficiency side of the scale. So there is a hurdle in the middle of this scale, and our goal is that all students will clear this hurdle and move into the proficiency side, or the green side, the top half of this scale. Now the truth is that not all students learn at the same rate. Not all students start from the same place, but we should have high expectations for every student. We wanted to create a scale that would clearly show where a student is on the continuum of proficiency. Now we added the highly proficient code because we wanted to recognize that some students have demonstrated proficiency and need to be challenged to take that to another level. So here's one way that we've tried to explain it in the rubric. Demonstrating proficiency is when students can perform in school with the structures that we put in place. So they can answer the questions for the most part fairly accurately with little to no support, and they can use their learning to solve school-based problems. However, the next level of achievement is when students can take that learning and apply it to new settings that are less structured, more real-life scenarios, more authentic, and they can solve those problems independently. So we're placing challenges before students that more closely resemble real-world, authentic challenges. That is a goal for every student, but we also know that not every student is ready for that level of challenge right away. So, for students that are in that LP range, we need to move them to EP before we can move them to DP. For students that are right at the EP range, which means they're sitting very close to the proficient level, we need to focus to getting them to proficient and then focus to getting them to highly proficient. So this continuum takes into account that all students have to move through this based on their own strategies and supports that are needed. So one of the questions that came up during our presentation last week was, well, how do I see my students' assignments? I'm used to going in and seeing whether or not my student turned in assignments, if things were on time, all that kind of stuff. And all of that functionality is still there. So by now, by the time you're seeing this, we have already turned on the parent portal. For those of you parents that have used the parent portal in the past, you're probably fairly familiar with it. When you log in, you can see each of your child's courses. You can click and drill down and see assignments and due dates and things like that. All of that will still exist. If you have any problems logging into the parent portal, we ask that you contact your school office directly and they will get you set up. They will make sure that you can log in. If you have multiple children, you should only have to have one login and you can just toggle between your two students. Okay, when you first log into Parent Portal, you'll typically land on this grades and attendance page. Here you will see all of the courses that your child is enrolled in. This is a real student's Parent Portal page, so I had to white out the student's name and the teacher's names and things just to kind of protect identities here. Teacher names and emails will appear in that column, and if you see over where there's the little lowercase I in brackets, that's where you will click to get more information about the course. And just a little bit of clarity here. In the traditional system, you may have seen a grade popping up there that you would then click on. Well, because we are moving to a competency-based system, there isn't just one grade for science. There are many grades for science, which is why there's the little I that you have to click in order to expand and open that up. Okay, we've clicked on the science course, and this opens up some detailed information about this science course. At the top, you'll see here the teacher has put in some information in the section description section, and that's just they've put in the rubric language so that parents and students can better understand the rubric. Down below, you'll see a list of all the assignments that have been assigned so far. So right here, I see 4 assignments in this course. They all have due dates on the far left. They've been categorized as either summative or formative. In education, typically a summative assignment is something that we're using to generate an overall grade. So we're assessing whether or not the students have learned the material, whereas a formative assignment tends to be more focused on practice. We're not necessarily using this information to create a grade. It's more practice and feedback so that we're checking in with students. Next to that category column, you'll see the name of each of these assignments. And then next to the next column over, under where it says flags, you'll see some areas here. So the blue icon is an indicator that those assignments have standards, or in our world, competencies or I can statements linked to each of the assignments. So we're going to click on one of those blue icons in a second, which will expand that assignment and show us specifically what were the I can statements that were being assessed. However, there are also space for other flags. So if an assignment is turned in late or is incomplete or is missing, the teacher has the ability to flag those things, and you would see them all show up here. Typically, there's a key at the bottom that tells you what all the icons mean. I've cut that off just to kind of make sure everything fit on the screen for you. The next columns over, the score and grade columns, they don't really function in this view because we're not applying scores to assignments. We're applying scores to standards or I can statements. So in the old days, you might have seen a score on this one assignment, but in fact, each assignment may have multiple scores. So we need to click on it and learn a little bit more about what it was measuring. Okay, so we clicked on the plastic EDP solution assignment, and we clicked on the little standards icon, and we opened up this assignment to get more information. So what we can see is this assignment, it measured 3 different I can statements, and you can see they're all listed right here. And then the student received a score of EP on each of them. And so the teacher has the ability to score each standard differently. In this case, the student actually scored an EP on all 3, but had they scored different grades on each of them, those would all be reflected in that score column. So one of the last things I wanted to make sure that you could see is, for those of you that are new to Parent Portal, again, this is back kind of on that main screen. When you log in, there's a tab that says email notification. If you click on that, you have the power to set up some settings about how you would like to be notified. It's kind of a cool feature. The account, your primary account, will be attached to one parent or guardian's email address, but you can add additional notification emails down below here where you see additional notification emails. You can add and have other people get automated emails. You can apply these settings to all of your students if you have more than one child. You can also click the button that says Send Now. I've blocked out that student's name, but if you're in looking at one student and you just want to have the reports sent to your email right away, you can just click that button and hit Submit, and you will get an automated email report. Okay, so if you've made it this far into the video, you are a trooper. I apologize if I've taken too long, but really wanted to take some time to ensure that you had a better understanding of our report card system. Again, the real purpose here is to provide parents and students and teachers more information that is directly connected to student learning and achievement. We believe that the reporting system and the assessment system, it will drive our teaching because, what we measure is what we say we care about. And this is part of a larger plan to really, really focus on improving student achievement. We know it's not easy. We know that change is hard. We know that a new report card is not something that is necessarily going to be immediately understandable to everybody, which is why we want to try to provide as much support as we can. So probably the people that are best to go to right away if you have very, very specific concerns about your child in your school or what's happening in classrooms would be your school principal. And so we've got both of their names and email addresses. You probably already know them, but we wanted to make sure that was here. Again, I introduced myself. I'm Joe Crawford. I'm the assistant superintendent. My email is right there. Kim Conant is the director of curriculum and grants. She really helped to work with me to put this whole presentation together. She was with me last week when we spoke both at Gilbert H. Hood Middle School and at West Roaring Brook. We are also very happy to answer questions and help you out if you have questions. Thanks again for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and have a great week.